Hello, everyone. Welcome to the College of Continuing and Professional Studies webinar, What's the Difference Between Project Management and Agile? Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Shanta Bilai, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar. If you have future questions about this webinar or other programs that we offer, our contact information will be on the last slide of this presentation. There are a few logistical items that I'd like to address before we begin. I ask that you please submit your questions throughout the webinar so we can address them during the Q&A portion in the last 10 minutes of this presentation. To submit your questions, select the Q&A button in the right-hand corner, type your question, and press Send. You can see the Q&A button in the top right corner and the Send button at the bottom. There will also be closed captioning available during the presentation as well. We will send an email in the next few days with a link to the recording of the webinar. The link will be sent to the email address that you submitted during the registration. Agile is philosophy about the way we work. Traditional project management, or the waterfall model, is a method of doing the work. There are similarities and differences in both approaches. In this webinar, we will cover the methodologies of traditional project management, the Agile Manifesto, which covers the foundational values and principles of Agile, Agile frameworks such as Scrum, Kanban, and extreme programming, the roles of traditional project management versus those in Agile frameworks. And now I will hand it over to Teri, our presenter today.
I'm so sorry. Apparently we lost all of the audio. So I will start over again. Hopefully you can hear me now. Okay, great. Oh, sorry, wrong direction. Let me fix this. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Teri Bylander-Pinke, and I work for Collaborative Leadership Team, an Agile coaching and training company. I have been working with Agile exclusively for a while now, but before that, I was a project manager at a Fortune 500 company, and before that, I was a civil litigation attorney. I only added my credentials up top to show that I have project management, Agile, and Agile scaling experiences. So if you have questions about that as we go along, feel free to enter them into the Q&A section. If there is some confusion in the world of work today and on the differences between project management and Agile. So today we're going to discuss the differences between project management and Agile, focusing mainly on the things that Shanta talked about with the differences in projects and products and the differences in roles. But before we begin, I want to express that there are no judgments here between options, and all of the approaches have their own purposes and values. Our agenda today will be this. We'll start with the basics of project management. Then we will cover the differences between projects and products. Next, we'll cover the basics of Agile and the manifesto. some of the Agile frameworks and their roles, and then finally we'll do a comparison of project management and Agile roles. Once that content is finished, we'll start the Q&A and we'll work through as many of the questions as we can before our time box ends. But feel free throughout to type your questions in the Q&A section. If I happen to see them as I go, I'll try to answer them. Otherwise, our wonderful moderator will help me keep track of the questions so that we can cover them at the end. All right, let's get into the content. So what is project management? Many of you probably know that project management is defined as the application of knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to project activities to meet the project requirements, essentially managing a project. Well, what is a project? The PMI definition of a project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique project, service, or result. Essentially, projects are temporary and close down upon completion of the work that they were chartered to deliver. A project manager is essential to project management as they are the process experts and professionals in that field. Project management has many processes, and with only an hour, we can't really get into all of them, but they all fall into 5 different groups. The first group is initiating. In projects, initiating helps us set the vision of what needs to be done. This is where we get our projects formally approved by the sponsor, where we define the initial high-level scope, usually in the form of a charter, and we identify the stakeholders and the benefits of the project. Once we've done all of this and we have approval to move forward, we move into planning. Planning is where we develop project plans, including more detailed scope definitions, estimated costs. We determine our budget, identify the risks that we know of, and start the process of planning for procurement and stakeholder engagement. Here we are essentially thinking through the whole project as much as we can in advance. This is the time when we define and create baselines for scope, schedule, and cost, so we can track our future progress. Then we move into executing, and executing is just as it sounds. It's when we execute the plans. Here is where the project team starts doing the work of creating the deliverables while the project manager manages or coordinates. Majority of the budget is spent in this process group. This is also where we're likely to see change requests, but only if a change control board can approve or reject these changes. The next process group is called monitoring and controlling. This is the most unique process group in that it happens over the whole project and it's not linear like some of the others. Monitoring and controlling is where you compare your plans to your actuals, measure variances, and try to get back on track if you've fallen off of the plan. Closing is where you close the project and get sign-off from the customer. Because of the linear nature of many of these processes, a lot of organizations have adopted a waterfall approach, if you've ever heard that term, to many of their projects. Meaning first they initiate, then they gather requirements, then they design a solution, then they execute or build that solution, then they test or verify if the solution is working, and finally they support or maintain the solution. Because of this, many organizations created roles that were synonymous with the activities that they were doing, like analysts, developers, testers, and support functions. This happened in so many organizations that this waterfall approach has almost become synonymous with project management. As you can see from the prior slides, project management is project focused. Many Agile frameworks now are product focused instead of project focused. This is the root of the differences between project management and Agile today. Projects have multiple projects. They have a start and a finish and are temporary in nature. Scope tends to be locked down at the beginning, and then change is typically discouraged through the change control process. And these temporary projects are really driven by a project plan. And then when everything is completed, the projects are reassigned when the project is, or the people are reassigned when the project is completed, and a support function is created for the customers. On the other side, with a lot of the Agile approaches today, we have product focus. And products have investments at the product level, people dedicated in teams, and those teams stay together. They don't disband at the end of a time period. Products really have a holistic view of the product being created, built, or enhanced. Scope, it tends to be dynamic and changing based on value to the customer. And anything from our customers is just feedback, and the work is put on the ordered to-do list, whether it's new features or support, it's all the same. Now that we know about project management and the differences between products and projects, we can discuss exactly what is Agile. Agile is often misinterpreted because it's really just a way of thinking or a mindset. It's a philosophy, essentially, on the way we do work. There's really no such thing as the Agile methodology because it's just a set of values and principles. Those values and principles are documented in something called the Agile Manifesto. And the URL is on the screen. So if you ever want to go and take a look at it later, please feel free to do so. In 2001, 17 men from differing development backgrounds, like Kanban, Lean, Scrum, or Extreme Programming, met at a ski resort in Park Lake City, Utah. They did so because they recognized that they were all doing similar approaches and working differently than a lot of companies were at the time. While they were together, they authored and agreed to these 4 values that you see here. And for those of you that are not in software, please feel free anytime we talk about software to just replace the words software with either product or service or whatever it is you do, like marketing or HR. Any of those can be substituted and this whole thing still works. So the first thing I'd like to point out on the Agile Software Development Manifesto is the very first line. It says, "We are uncovering better ways." Notice that this is present tense. These guys really knew that this was going to be a movement and it was growing and that there will always be something new to learn. So they wrote the whole thing in present tense. They wrote, "We are uncovering better ways of developing software and doing it by helping others do it." Then notice at the bottom, it says we value the items on the left more than the values on the right. This doesn't mean that we don't value the items on the right. It just means that we value the ones in bold on the left a little bit more. So number 1, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. I'm sure all of you have been on an email chain at some point in your life that copied like 20 people and seemingly instantaneous blew up your email to tens or even hundreds of emails. That's an example of valuing a tool over the individuals involved. So what we'd love to see is if somebody needs to talk to other people, is they hop on a phone call or, schedule a meeting if we know it's going to be a controversial topic. Number 2, working software over comprehensive documentation. This doesn't mean we don't do documentation. It just means that it might look a little differently or happen at different times than we're used to. And really, do you want to build a beautiful document or build the right working thing? Number 3, customer collaboration over contract negotiation. What we're trying to avoid here is spending so much time on contracts. In my work previously as an attorney, I can't even tell you the number of times I would redline items back and forth with other attorneys without speaking to them. We just send documents back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. What that demonstrated was actually a lack of trust and a lack of transparency with each other. In the few times as an attorney that I actually collaborated with another human on the other side, it greatly increased our trust and efficiency. And we finished our documents much faster, and they were probably actually better documents for it. Number 4, responding to change over following a plan. What if a pilot didn't deviate from the flight plan even though another plane was in its course? It would be disastrous. To be competitive, we need to be able to respond quickly to our customers and end users. We need to look at the world right now. I mean, just take a look at everything happening with the coronavirus. We're constantly responding to change on a daily basis to adapt to our changing environment. That's what we need, responding to change over following a plan. One thing to note about this manifesto is because it was written in 2001 for frameworks that have existed long beyond that, majority of the authors are still alive today, and you can find them on social media. So Kent Beck, Mike Beadle, Ari Van Bennekom, Alistair Cockburn, Ward Cunningham, Martin Fowler, James Grenning, Jim Highsmith, Andrew Hunt, Ron Jeffries, John Kern, Brian Merrick, Robert C. Martin, Steve Miller, Ken Schwaber, Jeff Sutherland, and Dave Thomas were the founders and the creators of this Agile Manifesto. And I believe all but Mike Beadle are still alive today. Those 4 values and 12 principles are those 4 values are supported by these 12 principles. And through email, the same gentleman later agreed to these. Again, here you can easily replace software or service with product. Let's spend a few minutes looking at each of the 12 principles. Number 1, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. What we're talking about here is just customer satisfaction. That's our highest priority. Welcome changing requirements, even late in development, is number 2. Agile processes harness change for the customer's competitive advantage. The thing that's important about this one is change for competitive advantage. So this one is often misinterpreted to say we change all the time, but that is not true. We change for the customer's competitive advantage. Number 3, we deliver working software frequently from a couple of weeks to a couple of months with a preference to the shorter time scale. Number 3 is all about shortening the feedback loop. The sooner we can get things out to our customers, the sooner we can figure out if we're on the right track. Number 4, business people and developers must work together daily throughout the project. This is all about that us versus them type of situation that tends to develop. We want to remove that. It's just us now. We all work for the name on the building. We all work for the same company. Number 5, build projects around motivated individuals and give them the environment and support they need and trust them to get the job done. What we're talking about here is the environment and trust. So this is all about creating a culture where we trust our teams. We trust the people doing the work. Number 6, the most efficient and effective method of conveying information to and within a development team is face-to-face conversation. So this is another example of like that email. We could have accomplished so much more just by having a face-to-face conversation. And right now, we should be still using face-to-face as much as we can, even though a lot of us are working remotely in this day and age. And we do that by taking a little sticky note right off of your little webcam so that you can join the web conference with your video. And the reason that this is so important is, what if I typed in a word or typed in a phrase that said, that's great, into a document? You might not be able to understand what I mean. Maybe I mean, that's great. Or maybe I mean, that's great. And until you start to see my body language, maybe I have my arms crossed, and you start to hear the tonal inflection in my voice, you don't really understand what I mean. Number 7, working software is the primary measure of progress. So here, we're just talking about how do we measure success. And we measure success with something that's working. Number 8, Agile processes promote sustainable development. The sponsors, developers, and users should be able to maintain a constant pace indefinitely. And here, what we're talking about is sustainability in our work. And oftentimes, people get really overwhelmed and have a lot on their plate, and it's not sustainable, and they start to become disengaged in the workforce. So we're trying to create a standard amount of work that just happens over time so that they can stay engaged. Number 9, continuous attention to technical excellence and good design enhances agility. What we're talking about here is just focusing on the system and our craft. Number 10, simplicity. The art of maximizing the amount of work not done is essential. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about building the simplest solution that we can to solve our customers' problems. Number 11, the best architectures, requirements, and designs emerge from self-organizing teams. Here we're talking about we is better than me. So the idea of the collective genius is better than any one individual. 12, at regular intervals, the team reflects on how to become more effective, then tunes and adjusts its behavior accordingly. Here we're talking about continuous improvement. So in order to say you're using Agile, or that your team is Agile, or you're being Agile, all you have to do is adhere to these 4 values and 12 principles. However, these are really guiding statements, and they're not really easy to follow instructions. So now that we know that Agile is a set of values and principles, a mindset or philosophy, or a set of guiding statements, it's the Agile frameworks that are the way that we can achieve that mindset or philosophy. So I like to think of Agile as an umbrella. So it's an umbrella term for all of the different individual frameworks. They all kind of fall underneath the umbrella. We have Scrum, Extreme Programming, Crystal Clear, DSDM, Lean Software Development, and Kanban, to name a few. There's a question mark next to Kanban because some Kanban implementations meet the values and principles and some do not. So sometimes Kanban is agile and sometimes it's not. Some of the frameworks in this list still utilize projects, but as you'll see in the next slide, those frameworks are not heavily utilized anymore. And this is why you still see some project terminology in the manifesto, but hear me talking about projects versus products. Who knows where the agile world will go? With the changing environment, this may change again in the future, but for today, there's a majority of the agile frameworks are using products. So this chart here shows the percentages of companies out there or people reporting into this survey and what framework they're using. Version 1 is an agile tool company, and every year they put out this survey to agile practitioners around the world and compile it. So this is the framework data for that last compilation. You'll see that this is 2018 data. And that's because the 2019 analysis data usually comes out in April. So I would expect that within the next month or so, we'll see last year's data on this to see if it changed at all. So what you see here is this graph from the survey shows the percentages of people reporting the frameworks that they're using. And as you can see, Scrum and Extreme Programming, or a hybrid of them, are by far the most utilized of the Agile frameworks. A distant third is Kanban, and Crystal Clear and DSDM were the frameworks on the other slide that heavily used projects, and as you can see, they're not really represented here. So hence the project versus product differences that we're seeing in the environment right now. So we're going to start with Scrum since it's the most popular. So we're going to spend the most time on it. But I will throw in Extreme Programming and Kanban as well. So here we're looking at Scrum on a page. Scrum starts with a to-do list at the top called a product backlog, and you'll see that at the top of the page. That is a list of all of the features, support ticket items, all of the requirements, essentially, that are needed for the product. And this list is constantly changing, and more detail can be added at any time, and the items are moving based on the changing priorities of the customer. And this process of adding detail and moving them and changing them is called refinement. So that's why you see the word refinement right next to the product backlog. Then the next in line in the process, if you follow the arrows, is sprint planning. And sprint planning is a time when the team plans for how much work they can do in a certain amount of time. And they also just start to discuss how they would actually accomplish the work. Then the arrows take us to the sprint backlog. And the sprint backlog is simply a detailing out of what sprint planning said. So the number of items that they said they can accomplish are written down, they're elaborated with tasks, and that is called the sprint backlog. Now we're going to move into the actual sprint and move into the execution portion. And so you'll see there that a sprint can be 1, 2, 3, or 4 weeks. And this is where all the execution activities take place. So all of the analysis, the building, testing, and deploying of the product all take place here. Then every single day during this sprint, the team touches base to check to see if they'll make their goal and adjust their plan. And they do this at an event called the Daily Scrum, and it's just 15 minutes every day. Then at the end of their sprint, The team should have built a potentially shippable product increment. Essentially, that's a fully functioning piece of the product. So one way I like to describe this is if you think about a website, maybe a news website. The potentially shippable product increment is not the entire website. It's just a piece of that website. So say there's a weather widget on the top that tells you what today's temperature is. That piece might be fully functioning at the end of a sprint, but maybe not even deployed yet because the rest of the website is not ready. So next we move into the sprint review. And at the sprint review, they review the product or the piece of functionality that was built with the stakeholders, and they get feedback on it. They also talk to the stakeholders about what's next for them and get any feedback if they don't think that that's the right thing. Then after the sprint review, the team goes into what's called a sprint retrospective. And at this retrospective, they get together and they talk about their work management process and they try to improve it in any way they can. After this meeting is done, they start the whole process all over again with the product backlog and sprint planning. So Scrum has 3 roles that support this process. The product owner is responsible for maximizing the value of the product. They're the sole person responsible for managing that product backlog that we talked about, and they are accountable for the success or failure of the product. They need to have the knowledge of the product, the authority to make all of the decisions related to the product, and the accessibility to the team building the product. The Scrum Master is responsible for promoting and supporting Scrum as it's defined. They are the process enablers, if you will. They're a servant leader, and they serve the product owner, the development team, and the organization. And then finally, the third role in Scrum is the development team. It's a cross-functional set of people who get together to build and release the product. This team is empowered to be self-organizing, meaning they determine how best to accomplish the work as a team. And there are no sub-teams nor any other roles within this development team. So that's very unique. The next framework we'll talk about is called extreme programming. And as you can see, the graphic looks kind of similar with all the loops and references back. Extreme programming is, in fact, very similar to Scrum, with one major difference. Scrum can be applied to any product, whereas extreme programming is exclusively for software development, hence the name extreme programming. So extreme programming starts on the left-hand side of this graphic with user stories. User stories are essentially the requirements written from a customer's perspective. Then they bring that list of user stories and spikes, so the architectural spikes. They're essentially small programs that are created to explore potential solutions. So they bring those 2 things in to plan a release. Then that release plan is the input into iteration planning. And iterations are 1, 2, or 3 weeks. So iteration planning is very, very similar to sprint planning that we saw in Scrum. And the iterations in extreme programming are 1, 2, or 3 weeks, whereas in Scrum, they were 1, 2, 3, or 4 weeks. So there's a lot of overlaps, as you can see, between these 2 frameworks. Then coding is done until it meets all of the acceptance tests. And then once it's approved by the customer, it's released in small releases. So as you can see, many things about extreme programming are very similar to Scrum. But some of the differences and why we see hybrids in Scrum and extreme programming lay in the individual practices within extreme programming that are not represented here. So some of those practices are things like paired programming, where two people work together at the same time to build the software. Refactoring, where anytime we touch a certain section of the code, we're constantly refactoring, updating, making it simpler, enhancing it, but not changing the functionality. Test-driven development, where we write all of our tests first before we start building anything, and then we code until we pass those tests. And continuous integration. Continuous integration is where the developers and the people that are programming or coding continuously get their code back into the main branch. Those are the specific practices within extreme programming, but if you've got an IT team that's utilizing Scrum, they'll often borrow or pull from those extreme programming practices to enhance their Scrum implementation. Within the XP framework, there are 5 roles. So Scrum only had 3, but XP has 5. So in XP, the first role is called customer. The customer defines the product to be built by determining the order in which features are to be built so that the product actually works. So this customer role in extreme programming is very, very similar to the product owner role in Scrum. The XP programmer is responsible for implementing code to support requirements or user stories. And then the primary responsibility of the XP tester is to help the customer define and implement acceptance tests for the user stories. So these 2 roles, the XP programmer and tester, would in Scrum be combined into the development team. The XP coach helps a team stay on process and helps the team to learn. So in Scrum, this would be very, very similar to the Scrum Master. The 3 basic things the XP tracker tracks are the release plan, the iteration plan, and the acceptance tests. There is no specific role in Scrum that does the tracking. However, all of these activities are kind of done across the different roles in Scrum. Then the final framework we're going to talk about today is Kanban. And this is where it gets a little bit different. So Kanban, the name Kanban originates from Japanese and very roughly translates into like virtual board or signboard, if you will. And Kanban is very different from all of the other frameworks in that it uses a pull system, meaning it works the board from right to left instead of left to right. So it always is focusing on done. So for example, what that would look like looking at the board on the page, if I were on a Kanban team, I would first look at the column that's right next to done and look at that item and see if there is anything I can do to help move that item to done. And then I would move to the middle column and see if there was anything I can do to help those. And then work my way all the way back to the beginning. And only if I can't help in any of the other items to get them to done, would I grab a new item from the to-do list. Another big difference in Kanban is that Kanban doesn't really start with the same kind of framework that Scrum or XP uses. It starts with what you do now. And initially, it respects all of the current processes, roles, and responsibilities. And then you make the agreement to pursue evolutionary change. So here, we see things like the Agile Manifesto says deliver working software frequently. So depending upon where you're at with Kanban, you may be Agile or you might not be Agile. So the manifesto says deliver working software frequently, but if your initial process roles and responsibilities don't allow you to do that, you would not yet be Agile. But if you maybe started with a Scrum process and now you're moving to Kanban, you would already be Agile. So Kanban is one, because it doesn't have a lot of prescription in it, it's one where it might fall within the Agile umbrella or it might not fall within the Agile umbrella. So now let's talk about the traditional roles on a project team. So you know about 3 different Agile methods and their roles, and you can see the roles we often see in IT projects, and they are project manager, analyst, developer, tester, and support. And as you can see in the Agile frameworks, all or at least most of the activities are still there, but because we think about teams differently in Agile, the titles are no longer the same. So for instance, in Scrum, analyst, developer, tester, and support all just become functions or skills the development team needs to build their product. In extreme programming, they separate the tester from the others that are needed to build the program or build the product, and then they call those programmers. Kanban is different altogether in that you start with your current roles, so it might even be these roles, and then you evolve them over time to solve problems that exist in your implementations. The role of project manager is really unique, though, in that Scrum and extreme programming don't have a role called project manager. And the activities or skills that are typically done by a project manager don't fall into a singular role like the others do, but they're kind of divided across multiple roles. So in Scrum, the product owner owns that to-do list, they own the budget, and they own the relationship with the stakeholders, which might seem like project management responsibilities. Then the Scrum Master coaches the product owner, the team, and the organization to be the best they can be, which oftentimes is what project managers do as well. And then the team is responsible for tracking all of their information and tracking their own plan. So, and in extreme programming, the story is very, very similar with the roles of customer, coach, and tracker. So one of the things that I've found with implementing Agile in many organizations is that project managers are really uniquely positioned to take on any role within their organization if they decide to change to Agile. So I've seen a lot of project managers that make a transition into product owners. I've seen a lot of project managers that make a transition into Scrum Masters, and some that even take a position on a team. So this is a really unique opportunity for any project managers out there that are moving into an Agile environment. While there may not be a role specifically for project managers, there's a lot of opportunities for you to add your skills into any of the other roles as well. So I hope you now understand some of the differences between project management and Agile, especially in projects versus products and the different roles. I specifically did not go over which should be used for different types of work in different organizations, because that's such a contextual question and the answer may change based on the nuances of your organizations. However, I hope I've armed you with some information so that you can be the judges for yourself on which approach is best. So now I'd like to open it up for questions. And it looks like in the Q&A, I have a few.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Terry. Let's see which ones. Here's a good one. Where does a product strategy or vision fit into constantly changing requirements?
So, especially with Scrum and extreme programming, they don't actually list a vision. But what we find in our company and in our implementations is that you need it. You need some sort of product vision in the Agile world, and we expand it to be more of a product vision. So, for example, I worked with a team that was building a pricing application, and the vision that they were trying to achieve was a essentially creating a product that allowed the salespeople in the organization to get the price they deserved for the value that was provided. And so that kind of overarching vision statement uh, really helped ground them, but it tends to be at a higher level than a project vision statement would be. When you're dealing with an agile approach, it's more of a vision for your product or for your team, so it might be as few as a couple of sentences just to ground you.
Awesome. And all right, so how is Agile different from process management, if you want to touch on that?
I guess I'm not 100% sure what is referenced by process management. I'm not sure if that's a framework out there. But in terms of process management, when it comes to uh, the kind of category within project management, it's really just a different process, and it's a more adaptive process instead of uh, a more structured adaptation in project management. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that's all I got for you today.
That works. Let's see. Um, how would you use Agile to develop a product where there is no underlying infrastructure to build upon?
So this works all the time in when you use Agile in different organizations. So our company uses Scrum to run our training organization, and we don't really have any infrastructure because we're just a services company. And so we utilize Scrum, and our backlog items just look a little differently in that we don't have any infrastructure type work. We have, conduct this webinar or hold this certified Scrum Master training class and things like that. But from an IT perspective, you would just continue to write your backlog items as you need them. And if there's no infrastructure that's needed, then you don't need to create items related to that. However, if you have a team that still needs infrastructure but doesn't have any infrastructure team members, then the first rule of Agile is do no harm. So you figure out the infrastructure team's work management process, and then you figure out the best ways to work with them within your Scrum process or your extreme programming process.
Cool. And let's see. How do you see some of these different frameworks aligning with design thinking or human-centered design?
So the biggest difference that I see is a lot of the design thinking, human-centered design uh, comes with almost roles and responsibilities around design being done up front. However, if you can get back past that, the concepts are really, really valuable to Agile teams because Agile teams are trying to focus on what the customer wants. So if you can do human-centered design in a more quick turnaround time, and I've seen a few teams that have been able to do that, they can be really, really successful in building the right thing for your customers at the right time.
Thank you for that information. And let's see. Do you have any recommendation or experience with organizations applying an agile methodology to deliver to an external client, such as service organization? Any best practice ideas?
I'm not sure I caught the whole question. Would you be able to repeat
Yeah.
that?
Do you have any recommendations or experience with organizations applying an agile methodology to deliver to an external client?
Oh, absolutely. So that's essentially our business. So we're a services organization, and all we do is deliver to external clients. We do some internal work in terms of like building our slide decks and things like that, but most of our work is for external clients. And essentially, what we like to do in terms of our backlog and our boards and things like that is we like to break down whatever work we're doing for the client into those backlog items. So we have a sales board that's separate. That's kind of our board that leads up to our Scrum board. And our sales board kind of keeps us apprised of where all the different conversations with our potential clients are. And then our Scrum board is where we track all the work. So I might have items that are to conduct an assessment of a Scrum team. So I'll go in and I'll evaluate 1 week about what they're doing. So that'll be my backlog item. And at the end, I'll have finished an assessment report and reported back. Or maybe I'm doing a coaching report. So I might do the coaching and I'll say, what are the things that I'm coaching this week? So I'm currently working with a team where I coach them on their sprint planning this week. So I would write that as a backlog item for me to do. So different things like that.
All right. So, oh, here's a good one considering everything that's going on right now. Can you have an effective Scrum team if you're not all co-located in the same spot?
Yes, absolutely you can. I've actually worked with some Scrum teams that had people here in Minnesota, people in Europe, and people in China. And once you get past the trying to coordinate and figure out what times you're going to have everything and the give and take surrounding that, so when are you going to plan and when are you going to meet to do your daily type activities? Once you figure that out, then it's really, really easy. You just make sure you do everything with web conferencing. And there are some fantastic agile tools out there that you can utilize to not only have your boards the same, see the work at the same time and in real time, but there are also really good collaboration tools, free whiteboard applications out there, and then a lot of your tools that where you're communicating back and forth. So like what you're using WebEx today, tools have some of those functions as well. So you just need to have a really good commitment from your team on participating that way and utilizing those tools.
Great. Okay. If Agile is new to an organization, how can you convince business functions to support the level of involvement/commitment that is needed from them?
So I think the best way to describe it, and first of all, don't use I like to call it scrummy language. A lot of teams that are in IT especially love to hop onto the jargon that's related with these approaches. So they'll say things like, come to our sprint review and things like that. So I like to, if you have businesses that are struggling with that, is abandon that language. So just invite them to a meeting where you're going to show them what you did, right? Use more simple language when you're talking to them to get them on board. And then the other thing I like to explain to them, in a lot of traditional project management approaches, they'll end up with a really big time commitment at the end to do all of the user acceptance testing. And with the agile approaches, they don't necessarily need to do that. So they're doing this small amount of testing on a bi-weekly or monthly or whatever your cadence is. They're doing the testing in these small little bits and pieces. and we're getting their feedback sooner so that we're not getting it wrong at the end. So that's the helpfulness of it. But sometimes it is too much for them. And then you can figure out what type of process works for you. I've had some people that were just so busy that they couldn't do it. But if we did a video recording of something, they said they would watch it in the evening. So we just really try to adapt with whatever their schedule needs.
Great. Thank you, Teri. So I believe we probably have time for one or two more. Let's see. Do you think the Agile framework allows teams to handle unforeseen events and projects, such as shortage in a supply chain or budget cuts?
Yes. So the biggest thing with Agile is we use the phrase turn on a dime and for a dime. So one of the things is that we can redeploy really quickly. So if we need more people to make something, we can do that. If we need more people ordering and monitoring the situation, we can do that. So depending upon what's needed, we can inspect and adapt to whatever is needed in the environment. So I know one of the things that we had to do right now was inspect and adapt and change all of our classes to be from in-person classes to virtual classes. And with that change, we didn't have any of the infrastructure set up or the resources to do so. So our team within the last essentially 4 days has ordered all of that infrastructure. We've gotten it in. We've started switching our content, and we are presenting our first virtual certified Scrum Master class today. So Agile teams, the whole purpose is so that you can turn and spin really fast.
Great. Thank you so much for your useful information, Teri. So now I'm going to touch on what I mentioned earlier. There, we will be sending a link to the webinar recording in a couple of days. There are also a few relevant courses listed on this slide if you would like to learn more. You can also visit our website for a full list of classes and educational programs. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope you all have a healthy and wonderful afternoon. And thanks again so much, Teri, for presenting.
Thank you.